Yes. And the availability ensures that the users who are who are accessing that particular information, that information should be available to them. Okay, there should not be any kind of malicious attack to the information, such as denial of service attack, that the information is not uh, being available to the user who want to get access to that information, right? So after that, so these are the three factors while maintaining the security of information. First is authentication. So process to ensure users or assets who they claim to be. Like in whenever we want to access our Google account or Gmail account, we log in using a username and password. Okay, means we are authenticated to access our account. Second is authorization. So this determines the access rights of a user, device, application, or process. So this means that if you are LPU student, if you are studying in LPU, you are authorized to access your UMS, University Management System. Any student who is outside university is not authorized. That's fine, you have got the ID and password, means you, if you have the valid ID and password, you're authenticated. But whether you're authorized or not, that will tell if you're studying in LP or not. The third is auditing, the process to evaluate the effectiveness of security, whether the security which we have applied, right, whether this is uh, correct or not, whether that's providing the proper security to our data information or not. So these are the controls which measures the effectiveness of the security controls. So we have already discussed this, and also this has been discussed, like the in case of risk triad, what do we have? Threats, vulnerabilities, and risks. Okay, so what happens is a threat, any threat agent, means any kind of person, unauthorized person, right, can give rise to a threat. Threat can be accessing your confidential data which you do not want to share with that person. Vulnerabilities means if there is risk of getting that particular information being stolen by that person. Okay, means if you are sending that information, if you have kept that information to a resource which is vulnerable to the threats, means which can be exposed to the threats. So the risk is what can happen once that threatening that person access your information. What can happen? That person can either change your information or can steal your confidential info. To what? To asset. Asset is the information. It can be your file, your data, your passwords, if you are storing that passwords to someone. And what do? We need to take a countermeasure to counter that particular risk. So these are the basic concepts. I've explained you these concepts so that you get a rewind of this. Okay, so the threats and assets I've already explained here. So let's get to today's topic. Okay, so today we will be talking about the key security controls. Means what should we do in order to make our NAS systems secure if we are using Windows or Unix, right? If we are using IP protocol, what protocols can be configured or implemented in order to ensure the security. Firstly, let's understand physical security. Now, the physical security becomes the foundation of overall IT security strategies. So, what measures can we take in order to secure the data center is firstly disabling all unused devices and ports. So, there can be a scenario, there can uh, in any data center that we are using redundant ports, or we are using multiple redundant switches or redundant devices, right? And there can be multiple ports, as we have already discussed. Okay, there can be one more port, there can be multiple HBAs, right? So we should disable all the unused and we should enable those which are in use. Next, on-site security, okay, 24/7. Next is biometric or security badge-based authentication to grant access to the facilities, right? So all of us know the biometrics can be the fingerprints, right? It can be the face detection systems, right? If you're accessing the third-party organization, sometimes you must have seen that some websites, they check whether the persons who are trying to access the resources or that particular website, whether that person is a robot or a person. So they give you some sort of authentication to identify some sort of images of vehicles, bridges, cars. Next is surveillance cameras to monitor the activity throughout the facility, like sensors and alarms to detect motion and fire. Next is identifying and access management. So in this is the process where we manage the user identifiers and the authentication and authorization. Okay, so organization may deploy the following: what? Authorization and authentication. I think I've already explained you the difference between authorization and authentication. You can write in the chat box if this is clear to you, or if you need it one more time, if you need to know this one more time. Abhinav says it's clear. Okay, so if it's not clear, let me just explain it to you once again to other students. Okay, authorization. So this restricts the accessibility and sharing of the files and folders. Accessibility means which person can access the files and folders, which person cannot access. Whether do we have the ID and password, that is the another concept. Okay, this says that if I have taken, like if I want to access Amazon's S3 services, storage services over the cloud, right? I will be authorized to use those services if I have made the payment, I have created the account. If I made the payment, only then I'll be authorized to use those services, right? And in case of authentication, I can say if I have a valid ID and password, right? Then we can say that we are authenticated to access the services. As I've explained you the meaning of in case of the LPUs, right? In of your university. Okay, so what can we do in order to implement authorization and authentication? The first is Windows ACL, Unix permission, and O authorization. So we will be discussing these in the next slides. And in if you want to check the authentication, in that case, we will be studying multi-factor authentication, Kerberos, CHAP, Challenge Handshake Authentication Protocol, and OpenID, right? Okay, so what is Windows ACL and Unix permission? So ACL access control lists are implemented in Windows. Okay, in Unix, we provide a role-based access. We give permissions to owners, groups, and others, right? Okay, so what is the difference? Here, let's first understand what is the meaning of access control list. So there are two types of access control lists in Windows: DACL, which is discretionary access control list, right, which determines the access control. And then we have SACL, system access control list, which determines which access need to be audited. Okay, so in this case, we check the accesses which need to be further check out whether the security is in control or not. The next is, in case of Windows, supports object ownership in addition to the ACL. Okay, what is the access control list? We create a list for a particular document, like we have series of documents. Okay, let me just annotate. Suppose I have file 1, file 2. Okay, so this can be some directories also. And here I have some roles. So this can be the administrators, suppose I have the groups. Suppose I have some user. Okay, so then in file 1 there can be permissions like read, write and execute, and there can be permissions in read, write and execute. Okay, if this administrator or owner is having three kind of permissions to read, write and execute, then this is in the access control list, means this person can access that particular file, and group can perform read and write maybe, and user can also perform the read and write. So these are so there can be the case when user is not in the access control list of this particular file. Okay, we are only providing access, we are only providing authorization to access the file 1 to these users, means admin and group, right? So similarly we can provide this user access to this file. So this is what we called as access control lists. Okay, giving the permissions to some users, maybe to administrators, to be some groups, to be some stakeholders, right? And what kind of permissions. I hope this is clear. And now the second point here is supports object ownership in addition to ACL. So this says child objects inherit ACL of the parent object. So this means that suppose there are two objects, one is the parent and then is a child object of that parent, right? Whatever permissions we have provided to the parent, those permissions will automatically be provided to the child, means the whatever users we have in that ACL list, the same will be for the child objects. Next is uses SID to control object access. So SIDs are the unique identifiers that identify a user or a user group by the windows, right? Suppose we some user is authorized to access a particular object, that user can write user 123 or can have or can write identifier. Okay, maybe the user is writing the user 1 in order to access a particular object but internally that windows will be using the identifiers in order to prove the authorization of that person, right? So next is the Unix operations. So in that we have three kind of permissions: read, write and execute. Specifies operations by ownership relation with respect to file, like what the owner can do, what the owner group can do, what everyone else can do. So in this case, in Unix we use bits. Okay, so Unix uses owner, group and others. Okay, so we have the 9-bit data like this. We have read, write X, we have read, write X. What do we have here? For owner we have three kind of permissions, for group we have three kind of permission, for others. So we create a mode 9-bit data like this, maybe read, write X, maybe read, not write, only X, maybe read, not write, maybe X. So this is the format that I've written here. And suppose for a particular data object, for a particular file, these are the permissions. So these bits means that we are giving the three kind of permissions to owner, and we are giving two kind of permissions to group. So here, why do we create group is we create group if we want to provide similar permissions to set of users. Suppose I have 3 users and I want to provide similar kind of permission, so we can put those users in a group and can provide the permissions to them. And for the third case, we have read and execute for others, right? So this means that any other user, any other person who wants to access that file will have the read and execute permission. So this is the kind of security that we can provide in the Unix based systems, and this is the security that we can provide in Windows-based system. Okay, we need to erase this. Okay, next is OAuth protocol. So here you can see the third one for checking the authorization is OAuth. So in this is an open authorization control that allows a client to access protected resources from a resource server on the behalf of the resource owner. So here you can see what are the entities that are involved in this kind of authorization is the resource owner, authorization server, and resource server. And this is the client. So this is simple protocol. Firstly, if client wants to access a resource, okay, firstly what it has to do is it has to send a request that this client wants to access a resource, which is called as authorization request. Then that resource owner grants that request. So this resource owner can check whether that particular, if that this client is having ID and password, this will request, and then check, after checking that if that is valid, then it is granting that. Then the client uh, the authorization grant that it has received, it will send that to the authorization server, and then it will get the access token, and that access token can be used to get the service request. Okay, so O authorization protocol needs, actually what happens is this needs access token from the organization, right? If that organization is provide, like suppose, okay, this is useful when we are retrieving tweets from the Twitter. We do not, we cannot download tweets directly from the Twitter if we want to do some analysis, right? So what we do is on the developers page of Twitter, we create an account, and over there the Twitter provides us the access token. Okay, four access key tokens, four kind of passwords, right? So that will tell us whether we are authorized. Sanjay, uh, I'm giving you the example. Yeah, this is what I'm saying now. You can implement this, like this O authorization protocol. You can implement using this protocol. What do we have to do is whenever we want to access the third party's resources, we should have the access token. Okay, we mentioned that access token in O authorization protocol, the tokens that we have got, the access key, the access token, and then we will be able to, once that access token is granted, is received by the resource server, then we can access that particular request. This is what I was saying. If you are making the developers account on Twitter, they will provide you four kind of keys, okay, and those keys we can use to retrieve the tweets from Twitter using O authorization protocol. So this is what I have personally used, yeah, in one of my projects. Next is the multi-factor authentication. So next is our authentication. Here you can see. So enabling authentication among client and server. Now, authentication on multiple factors. That's it. This is very simple. You already know authentication means user ID and password, username and password. But we can include some more factors in order to ensure more security. The first factor is what a user knows, for example, a password. Okay, like we usually log in using username and password. The second is what a user has, for example, a token. And third is who user is, for example, a biometric. Sometimes what happens is whenever we are logging to Gmail, we provide the username and password. But what happens is Gmail doubts that whether the person who is trying to access that account using username password, whether that person is same or not. So it asks us to mention the mobile number, and it asks us to fill the OTP. This usually happens whenever we changes a device. For once we are using a one system, right? One laptop, and when we are trying to access a Gmail from another laptop from someone else's or someone else's phone, right? So it doubts us and it asks us for the OTP. So then from the phone we check the message of the OTP, then we fill the OTP. So that also becomes the second factor of the authentication. So this is the example that has given, right? So this is simple. Okay, so next kind of authentication is Kerberos. Okay, so this is a network authentication protocol which provides strong authentication for client server applications. So in which we use a secret key cryptography. So a key is involved and client and a server can prove their identity to each other over an insecure connection. Okay, so the Kerberos. So there are two kinds of servers. So this is the clients. This is the client, and this is the Kerberos server. So in Kerberos server, KDC is implemented, which is Kerberos distribution, the key distribution center, right? So this key distribution centers maintain Active Directory. So here in the directory, this ensures that the particular server which is requesting for the resource request, whether that is authenticated or not. From here, it can check the ID and password for that particular server. Okay. So one more terminology that I want to tell you, and that is the client which is trying to access the client which is trying to request the resources is called as the Kerberos client. Okay, so this is the client which asks for the ticket from the KDC is called as the Kerberos client. That's why it has written the Kerberos client. So this is the server which ensures the authentication, and this is the NAS device. So this can help this client getting access to the resources, right? So actually this Windows client will be accessing to the resources using this NAS device. So let's understand the steps how authentication takes place in this. In the first case, the user first log on to the workstation, right? So this can be implemented. This is primarily used when we're using the Microsoft Active Directory domain and we need authentication in that case. And when the user log in to the Active Directory domain using an ID and password, right? So then the client computer, the user has login using ID and password, the client sends a request using the ID and password, okay, using the authentication service running at KDC. So this Kerberos server is having the authentication service, okay. So this sends the ID proof to this authentication server. So this authentication server from the Active Directory, the step is not mentioned here in the diagram. So this is the first step only. So this KDC authenticates whether the person who has provided us the ID and password is authenticated to access that particular request, to be granted the ticket for that request or not, right? Once that is done, the KDC, this verifies the login information, right, from this directory. And in the second step, what it does is it sends a ticket back to the client. After the authentication, a ticket is sent back to the client. So this ticket is called as ticket granting ticket, TGT, right? And also it sends a session key back to the client, which is encrypted session key. Okay, so the session key does not last long. This has a less time period. It means the client has to use that session time within that time period only. Okay, so the key which is sent by the client is in the decrypted form, which can only be encrypted by this Kerberos server, right? Yeah, the ticket, actually, the ticket, the TGT ticket is in the encrypted form. Yes, Abhinav, actually the TGT ticket is in the encrypted form, right? Which is only decrypted by KDC, but the session key can be decrypted by this Windows client. Okay. TGT is encrypted, which can only be decrypted by Kerberos server, and session key can be decrypted by the Windows client. Next, in the third step, when the client receives the ticket and session key, decrypts that using the session key, it requests the Kerberos server along with the ticket plus the server name, means the details of the resource that this client needs to access, right? And in this case, this is the previously generated ticket granting key is sent back to the KDC server. Is this clear? Next, in the next step, the KDC needs to check. Here you can see the fourth step. KDC needs to check the permission. So this checks the Active Directory, and this ensures that whether this particular user, how get the server name? The client needs to access a particular resource. That's why it's like, so this client, so this is the additional server that we have got. Okay, but the client needs the resources in this, which is connected to the NAS device. So, but clients, because this is authentication service, client will first get its authentication done by the Kerberos server. Okay, so next, after the authentication is done, next the KDC will return again a service ticket back to the client. So in this case, so this service ticket will contain firstly the fields addressing to the clients, right? And secondly, it will provide the information about the server which will be hosting that particular service. Once that is done, the client will then send that service ticket. So client here receive the service ticket from the Kerberos server. It will send that service ticket to the NAS device, right? So because this will be containing the information about the server also, so this NAS device will decrypt the server portion. From this server key, it will decrypt the server portion and it will store it in the key tab, right? So the server key is valid for a lesser amount of time, and as soon as this is valid, so same authorization need not to be performed. Okay, the server automatically allows that client to access the resources that it wants to access, right? So in this case, a new client server session is generated here, right? And the NAS device sends a session key, session ID back to the client. Okay, so that it tracks the activities of the client, and thus the client will be able to access the resources. So this is about the Kerberos. Let me first quickly explain you once again. The client needs to access the resources. So first it has to get its authentication done. For that, it sends the ID and password to the KDC Kerberos server. So this Kerberos server check whether that the client which is providing the user ID and password is authenticated or not. Then it send back a ticket which is in the encrypted form plus the session key back to the client. Then client decrypts the session key. The client cannot decrypt the ticket, and then it sends the server name along with the ticket, which is uh, and the decrypted session key to the KDC Scarborough server back. So now the client is sending the ticket and requesting for a resource. Then the Kerberos server first check from the Active Directory whether that person who is trying to access the resources is authorized or not. Once that is done, then this KDC server, they send back a service key along with the where it addresses the client plus the resource details, the server details back to the client. So this is the service key it has got. Then this particular service key, this client sends to the NAS device. So this service key is having a server portion as well, right? So this NAS device decrypts the server portion and keeps that in the key tab. Okay, till the time that key is active, we do not need to perform the authorization again. So that's fine. Then a session is created between the client and the server. Then this NAS device sends back the session ID back to the client. So this is about Kerberos. I hope this is clear. Please write in the chat box quickly. Okay.